I had conducted over 1,000 interviews in my career. I had never once made a mistake until that day. The man sitting across from me, Curtis Bennett, single father and former warehouse supervisor, was never supposed to be in this room. A system glitch had brought him here to an interview for a position he was wildly unqualified for. One apology and everything would return to order. But when Curtis stood to leave without complaint, without begging, without even a flicker of resentment in his eyes, I found myself unable to speak. What if sending him away was the real mistake? The 40th floor of Horizon Group headquarters offered a view that most people would never see in their lifetime. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline like a living painting, and the morning sun cast long shadows across Italian marble floors. Everything in this office had been selected with precision. The minimalist furniture, the temperature set to exactly 68 degrees, the complete absence of personal photographs on my desk. I preferred it that way. Sentiment was clutter, and clutter led to inefficiency. At 38 years old, I had built Horizon Group from a startup operating out of my college apartment into a technology empire worth over $12 billion. Business magazines called me the ice queen of the business world. My employees called me Ms. Parker and nothing else. I had earned both titles through 15 years of relentless discipline, strategic brilliance, and an almost inhuman ability to remove emotion from every decision I made. My schedule that day included 4 interviews for the chief operating officer position, the second most powerful seat in my company. Each candidate had been pre-screened through 7 rounds of evaluation. Each possessed an MBA from a top program, at least 15 years of executive experience, and references that read like a who's who of Fortune 500 leadership. The man currently sitting across from me had none of these things. Curtis Bennett wore a suit that was at least 5 years old, though it had been pressed with obvious care. His shoes were polished but worn at the heels. He sat with his back straight, his hands resting calmly on his knees, and his eyes meeting mine without flinching. I had noticed that detail immediately. Most candidates, even the accomplished ones, showed some nervousness in my presence. They fidgeted with their watches, cleared their throats too often, or let their gazes drift to the window when my questions grew pointed. Curtis did none of these things. For a while, I asked him about leadership philosophy, crisis management, organizational scaling. His answers were thoughtful, practical, surprisingly insightful. He spoke about people the way most executives spoke about quarterly projections, with genuine investment in their outcomes. I found myself leaning forward, slightly intrigued despite myself. Then the door opened. My executive assistant, Jessica, stepped inside with an expression I had never seen before, something between embarrassment and barely controlled panic. "Miss Parker, I need to speak with you privately. It's urgent." I raised one eyebrow but maintained my composure. I turned to Curtis with a practiced smile. "Would you excuse us for a moment, Mr. Bennett?" Curtis nodded. "Of course." In the hallway, Jessica's words came out in a rush. There had been a system error, a significant one. The AI scheduling software crossed 2 candidate files. Curtis Bennett was supposed to interview for the logistics coordinator position in the other building. He was not a COO candidate. She swallowed hard. He applied for an entry-level operations role. $45,000 a year. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "What are you telling me?" He had a community college degree and 10 years of warehouse management experience. His last company went bankrupt 8 months ago. Jessica looked like she might be sick. She did not know how this happened. The system flagged him as a top-tier executive candidate. All his materials were reformatted to match our senior interview protocols. She only caught it because she manually cross-referenced his social security number. For a long moment, I said nothing. In my mind, I replayed the last 20 minutes. Curtis's calm demeanor, his articulate responses, the way he had held my gaze without wavering. I had been impressed by a warehouse supervisor who did not belong in my building. The thought should have made me angry. Instead, I felt something I could not quite name. "I'll handle it," I said finally. "Return to your desk." Back in my office, I studied Curtis with new eyes. He sat exactly as I had left him, patient and composed, apparently unaware that his entire presence here was a mistake. "Mr. Bennett," I began, settling into my chair. "I've just been informed of an unusual situation." "The scheduling error," Curtis said quietly. My expression flickered. "You knew?" "I suspected." Curtis met my gaze steadily. When Jessica mentioned the COO position in her confirmation call, he assumed there had been some confusion. He applied for a logistics coordinator role, entry level. Then why did he come? The question hung in the air between us. Curtis considered it carefully before answering. Because he had been unemployed for 8 months. Because he had a 6-year-old daughter who needed stability. Because when someone offers you a door, even if it's the wrong door, you walk through it and see where it leads. He straightened his tie, an unconscious gesture. He never intended to deceive anyone. He answered every question honestly. He just did not correct an assumption that was not his to correct. I should have ended the conversation there. A polite apology, a referral to the correct department, perhaps a note to HR about the software malfunction. Clean, efficient, appropriate. Instead, I found myself studying him more closely, searching for something I could not quite define. Curtis rose from his chair with quiet dignity. "He appreciated my time, Miss Parker. He knew I had qualified candidates waiting. He would not take any more of my morning." He extended his hand for a professional handshake. As he did, his phone slipped from his jacket pocket, clattering onto the marble floor. I bent to retrieve it at the same moment Curtis did. Our hands nearly touched over the device, and I found myself looking at the lock screen, a photograph of a little girl with bright eyes and butterfly clips in her hair, laughing at something beyond the frame. The image struck me with unexpected force. For just a moment, I was not in my corner office anymore. I was standing in a hospital corridor 10 years ago, listening to a doctor explain that my younger brother Ryan had been declared dead on arrival after a car accident. I handed the phone back to Curtis without comment, but when he turned toward the door, I heard myself speak. "Mr. Bennett?" He stopped, his hand on the door frame. "I have a proposal for you. It's unconventional, and you're under no obligation to accept." Curtis turned slowly. His expression revealed nothing. I was offering him a 3-month trial position in our operations division, not as a logistics coordinator, as a special project associate reporting to senior leadership. The role did not technically exist yet, which meant there was no precedent for success or failure. I kept my voice carefully neutral. He would receive no special treatment, no protection from evaluation, and no guarantee of continued employment. If he did not perform, he would be terminated without severance. If he did perform, we would discuss permanent placement. For the first time, I saw something like surprise cross Curtis's face. Why? It was a fair question. I was not entirely sure I had an answer, because in that time with him, he showed me something I rarely saw in this building. He was calm under pressure, thoughtful in his responses, and completely uninterested in impressing me. That was either remarkable confidence or remarkable authenticity. I folded my hands on my desk. I would like to know which one it was. Curtis was quiet for a long moment. I could see him calculating the risks, the potential costs, the daughter who depended on his stability. "I need to think about it," he said finally. I gave him until the next opportunity to decide. Jessica would give him the details on his way out. I turned back to my computer, signaling the end of the conversation. "I have 3 more interviews today, Mr. Bennett. Don't let me regret giving you this option." Curtis nodded once, then he walked out of my office without another word. I sat alone in the silence that followed, staring at the empty chair across from my desk. Through the window, The city stretched endlessly toward the horizon, millions of lives moving through carefully constructed systems, each one believing they were in control. I thought about my brother. I thought about the photograph of the little girl with butterfly clips, and I wondered for the first time in years whether my perfect system had ever truly protected me from anything at all. Curtis accepted the offer. His first day at Horizon Group bore no resemblance to the polished executive floor where he had met me. The operations division occupied a sprawling warehouse complex in Cicero, all concrete floors and fluorescent lighting and the constant hum of machinery. Here, workers moved in careful choreography around conveyor belts and loading docks, tracking shipments worth millions of dollars with handheld scanners and tired eyes. Curtis arrived early. He wore the same pressed suit from his interview, though he had been told business casual was acceptable. First impressions, he had learned, rarely got second chances. Jason Morrison was waiting for him. The operations director stood near the entrance with his arms crossed and a smile that did not reach his eyes. Jason was Harvard educated and had spent years positioning himself as the obvious choice for the COO role that I had yet to fill. His suits cost more than most employees made in a month. His handshake was firm to the point of aggression. Curtis Bennett, Jason said, drawing out the syllables Agikai, the man who walked through the wrong door and somehow landed on his feet. I was told to make sure you're properly oriented. I appreciate that. I'm sure you do. Jason's smile widened. Let me be direct with you, Curtis. I don't know what happened in that interview room, and frankly, I don't care. What I care about is results. This division runs on precision, accountability, and performance metrics. We don't have room for special circumstances. Curtis met his gaze without flinching. He was not asking for special circumstances, just point him to his desk. Something flickered in Jason's expression, surprise perhaps, or irritation at finding no easy target. He assigned Curtis to a workstation in the corner of the main floor, far from the windows and surrounded by filing cabinets that had not been organized in years. Your first project, Jason said, dropping a thick folder onto the desk. Inventory reconciliation for the Northeast Distribution Network. The previous analyst quit some time ago. You have until the end of the week. The folder contained over 300 pages of discrepancies. Curtis opened the first page without comment. Behind him, he could hear Jason's footsteps retreating across the concrete floor, followed by the low murmur of conversation. He did not turn around. He already knew what they were saying. The next period established a pattern. Curtis received the tasks no one else wanted, the complex reconciliations, the angry vendor calls, the overnight inventory counts that kept him in the warehouse until well past midnight. His colleagues maintained a careful distance, their conversations falling silent whenever he approached the break room. Someone had started a rumor that he was my personal project, a diversity hire meant to improve the company's public image. Curtis heard the whispers. He said nothing. He arrived early and left late, except on the days when he needed to pick up his daughter Zoe from school. Those absences were noted in his file with clinical precision, each one recorded as evidence of insufficient commitment. What the file did not capture was the quality of his work. The Northeast inventory reconciliation was completed ahead of schedule, with errors reduced significantly from the previous quarter. A shipping dispute that had dragged on for weeks was resolved in a single phone call, after Curtis spent an hour simply listening to the frustrated client describe their concerns. A loading dock scheduling conflict that had nearly caused a walkout was diffused when Curtis sat down with both shift supervisors and helped them find a compromise neither had considered. None of this appeared in Jason Morrison's weekly reports to senior leadership. I made an unannounced visit to the Cicero facility. It was the kind of thing I rarely did. My presence in the field made employees nervous and disrupted carefully maintained workflows. But something had been nagging at me since the day I had offered Curtis his trial position. A persistent curiosity I could not quite name. I found him on the warehouse floor, standing between two groups of workers who looked ready to tear each other apart. The conflict stemmed from a scheduling change that had left the night shift with twice the workload and half the recognition. Accusations had been building, and today they had finally boiled over into a shouting match that stopped all work in the Eastern Wing. Curtis did not shout back. He did not invoke authority or threaten consequences. Instead, he pulled two chairs into the center of the floor and sat down in one of them, gesturing for the night shift supervisor to take the other. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. "From the beginning. I'm listening." I watched from behind a stack of pallets as the supervisor, a heavyset woman named Carla, who had worked at Horizon for 11 years, poured out her frustrations. Curtis nodded occasionally, asked clarifying questions, and never once interrupted. When Carla finished, he turned to the day shift supervisor and repeated the same invitation. Before long, the two supervisors were talking directly to each other for the first time in months. Curtis had identified the root cause of the conflict, a software update that had inadvertently reassigned workload metrics without notifying either team, and proposed a temporary adjustment that gave both shifts fair recognition until the system could be properly corrected. The workers returned to their stations, the Eastern Wing resumed operations, and Curtis Bennett walked back to his corner desk as if nothing remarkable had happened. I left the warehouse without making my presence known. In the car back to the city, I stared out the window at the passing cityscape and thought about leadership. I had built my empire on the belief that systems could solve any problem, that human error could be engineered away, that efficiency was the highest virtue. Curtis led differently. He led by being present, by listening, by treating every person's concerns as worthy of genuine attention. It was inefficient, time-consuming, impossible to scale, and yet his results spoke for themselves. A crisis came. A shipment worth $2 million, critical components for Horizon's largest manufacturing client, was delivered to the wrong distribution center in Ohio. By the time the error was discovered, the client had already halted their production line and was threatening to terminate a contract worth $50 million annually. Jason Morrison called an emergency meeting. His face was carefully composed, but I could see the tension in his jaw as he addressed the assembled managers. "This is a catastrophic failure of our logistics protocols," Jason announced. "I've reviewed the incident report, and it's clear that the warehouse team deviated from established procedures. I'm recommending immediate disciplinary action against the employees responsible." The room was silent. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Curtis raised his hand. Jason's eyes narrowed. "Yes, Mr. Bennett." Curtis had spent time reviewing the tracking data for that shipment. The warehouse team followed every protocol correctly. The error originated in the routing software, specifically in an update that was deployed some time ago. Curtis pulled a tablet from his bag and placed it on the conference table. The update was approved by operations leadership without adequate testing. He had the authorization logs here. Jason's face went pale. The authorization logs bore his digital signature. I studied the tablet screen for a long moment before speaking. "What do you recommend, Mr. Bennett?" The shipment was currently sitting in a warehouse 90 miles from its intended destination. If we coordinated with 3 independent trucking contractors that night, we could redirect the components and have them on the client's loading dock by morning. He had already identified available drivers. He could make the calls within the hour. "That's outside your job description," Jason interjected. Protocol requires that we solve the problem," I cut him off. "Mr. Bennett, you have authorization. Make the calls." Curtis worked through the night. He coordinated with truck drivers, negotiated expedited delivery fees, and personally monitored the shipment's progress through a tracking app on his phone. The components were delivered to the manufacturing client with time to spare. The contract was saved. Jason Morrison's authority was quietly diminished, and Curtis Bennett had made a powerful enemy. I found him in the warehouse that night, long after the crisis had been resolved and the day shift had gone home. He was helping the cleaning crew stack pallets, his suit jacket abandoned on a nearby chair, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "You could have gone home hours ago," I said, stepping out of the shadows. Curtis looked up, unsurprised by my presence. "The night crew is still here. They stayed late because of the emergency. It did not feel right to leave them cleaning up alone." I walked closer, picking my way around crates and equipment. "Most people in your position would be upstairs celebrating. You just saved a $50 million contract." "I did not save anything. I just made some phone calls." Curtis set down the pallet he was carrying and straightened up. "The drivers did the hard work. The warehouse team loaded everything correctly the first time. All he did was point people in the right direction." I studied him in the harsh fluorescent light. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, tension in his shoulders, but there was no trace of self-pity in his expression. "Your daughter," I said. "Where is she tonight?" "With her grandmother. I will pick her up in the morning." Curtis wiped his hands on his trousers. "Zoe is used to it by now. Her mother worked night shifts too, before she got sick." I did not press further. I sensed there was more to the story, but this was not the moment to ask. Instead, I sat down on a nearby crate, my designer heels incongruous against the concrete floor. For a while, neither of us spoke. The warehouse hummed quietly around us, the soft whir of ventilation systems, the distant beep of a forklift backing up, the ordinary sounds of a world that kept moving regardless of crisis or resolution. "Why do you do it?" I asked finally. "Stay late, help the cleaning crew, take on work that is not yours. Most people would do the minimum required and go home to their families." Curtis considered the question carefully because work was not just about tasks, it was about people. And people remember how you made them feel long after they have forgotten what you accomplished. It was such a simple philosophy. I had built a $12 billion empire on complexity, algorithms, metrics, and optimization strategies that filled entire server rooms. And here was a man with a community college degree telling me that leadership came down to making people feel seen. The strange thing was I believed him. At one point, Curtis's daughter appeared in the office. A water main break had closed Zoe's elementary school without warning, and Curtis had no choice but to bring her to work. He set her up in a quiet corner with crayons and paper, apologizing profusely to his supervisor for the disruption. I happened to walk through the operations floor that afternoon. I stopped when I saw the little girl hunched over her artwork, tongue poking out in concentration. Zoe had drawn a picture of two figures holding hands, a tall man and a small girl with butterfly clips in her hair. Above them, in wobbly 6-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Daddy is my hero." I stood frozen, staring at the crude drawing. Something old and painful stirred in my chest. Zoe looked up and caught me watching. The girl's eyes were bright and curious, completely unafraid of the imposing woman in the expensive suit. "Do you have a daddy?" Zoe asked. The question was innocent. The answer was not. I had a father. A distant, demanding man who had built his own business empire and expected his children to earn every scrap of his approval. He had never held my hand. He had never been my hero. When my brother Ryan died, my father had attended the funeral in an expensive suit and returned to the office the same afternoon. "Yes," I said finally, "I do." "Is he nice?" I looked across the room at Curtis, who was typing furiously at his computer while glancing at his daughter every few seconds. I watched the way his expression softened each time he looked at Zoe, the way his whole body seemed to orient toward her like a compass finding north. "Some fathers are nicer than others," I said quietly. The rumors started soon after. Someone had seen me talking to Curtis on the warehouse floor at night. Someone else had noticed my unusual interest in the operations division. By the time the whispers reached Jason Morrison's ears, they had transformed into something far more damaging. Suggestions that Curtis Bennett's position had nothing to do with his abilities and everything to do with an inappropriate relationship with the CEO. Jason fed the flames carefully, never making direct accusations but always asking pointed questions. "Interesting that Bennett got that special project assignment, isn't it?" he would say to colleagues. I wonder what qualifies him for opportunities the rest of us never get. The implications were clear. Curtis was either a diversity token or something worse. Either way, he did not belong. Curtis felt the shift in atmosphere like a change in temperature. Colleagues who had begun warming to him grew distant again. Conversation stopped when he entered rooms. One afternoon, a middle manager cornered him in the break room and said flatly, "You're lucky. You know, this place is not meant for people like you. Enjoy it while it lasts." Curtis did not respond, but that night, alone in his apartment, after putting Zoe to bed, he sat in the darkness and let himself feel the weight of it all. The assumptions, the suspicions, the constant need to prove that he had earned his place, that he was not a charity case or a checkbox on someone's diversity report. He had felt this weight before in other jobs in other cities. He had learned to carry it without complaint, but tonight it felt heavier than usual. Then Zoe got sick. Her asthma had been manageable for years, but a respiratory infection triggered a severe attack in the middle of the night. Curtis rushed her to the emergency room, holding her small hand as she struggled to breathe, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore. She stabilized by dawn. The doctors wanted to keep her for observation. Curtis called the office to explain his absence. Jason recorded it as an unexcused leave violation. I sat alone in my office long after everyone else had gone home. The photograph of my brother Ryan was in my hands, a snapshot from his 21st birthday, the last one he would ever celebrate. He was laughing at something off camera, his whole face bright with joy. I had built Horizon Group in the years that followed his death, channeling my grief into ambition, my guilt into control. Every system I created, every protocol I implemented, every inefficiency I eliminated, all of it was an attempt to construct a world where bad things could not happen if you just planned carefully enough. But Curtis Bennett had walked into my life and disrupted everything. He did not fit my systems. He could not be optimized or controlled. And yet, something about him made me question whether my systems had ever truly worked at all. The scandal broke. An anonymous email had been sent to every major business publication in Chicago with a subject line designed for maximum damage. Billionaire CEO's secret relationship with black employee. Romance or PR stunt. Attached were photographs taken through the warehouse windows, me and Curtis sitting together in the dim light. Our conversation intimate enough to fuel speculation. The email also included Curtis's personnel file highlighting his sudden leave of absence for his daughter's medical emergency, framed as evidence of special treatment. By midday, the story was everywhere. Horizon Group stock dropped significantly. The hashtag Horizon Scandal trended on social media. My phone buzzed with messages from board members demanding an emergency meeting. Curtis discovered the story when a stranger on the subway recognized him from the photographs. By the time he reached the office, someone had already leaked his home address online. His phone was flooded with messages, some supportive, most hateful. Several included threats specific enough to make his hands shake. Zoe had been taunted at school, a classmate's parent had shown their child the news coverage, and the children had repeated what they heard. She came home crying, asking why people were saying mean things about her daddy. Curtis held her until she fell asleep, then sat in the darkness of his kitchen and made a decision. He walked into my office and placed a single sheet of paper on my desk. "My resignation," he said quietly, "effective immediately." I looked at the letter but did not touch it. Curtis had worked his entire life to build something stable. He was not going to be the reason I lost my company. Curtis's voice was calm, but something in his eyes had gone dim. Zoe needed stability. She needed a father who was not being attacked on the internet every day. And I needed this to go away. The board wanted me to fire him, I said. My PR team wanted me to issue a statement calling his hiring a mistake. Everyone in this building thought that was the smart play. They were probably right. I stared at him for a long moment. Curtis stood perfectly still, waiting for me to accept his resignation, to thank him for his service, to let him walk away with what little dignity remained. Instead, I asked, "Is that what you want?" "What I want does not matter." "It matters to me." The words surprised us both. Curtis looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment, the walls between us seemed thinner than they had ever been. But then he straightened his shoulders and turned toward the door. "Goodbye, Miss Parker. Thank you for giving me a chance." He walked out. I watched him go, the resignation letter still untouched on my desk. I did not call him back. I sat alone in my penthouse that night, surrounded by silence and the glow of city lights far below. The resignation letter lay on the coffee table beside the photograph of Ryan. Two pieces of paper that somehow contained everything I had spent a decade trying to escape. My phone buzzed. The screen showed a name I had not seen in months. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "I saw the news," my mother said. Her voice was softer than I remembered, worn smooth by years of careful distance. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine." The single word carried a weight of history between us. "You do not have to pretend with me." I closed my eyes. "The board wants me to fire him. Everyone thinks it is the smart play. Maybe it is." "Is that what you think?" The question hung in the air. I looked at Ryan's photograph, at his laughing face frozen in time. For years I had kept that grief locked away, buried beneath spreadsheets and strategy meetings and the relentless pursuit of control. But tonight, the walls I had built so carefully were beginning to crack. "I do not know what I think anymore," I admitted. "I have spent so long trying to make everything perfect, trying to build something that could not break, and none of it." My voice faltered. None of it brought him back. None of it made the guilt go away. My mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Ryan did not die because I missed a phone call, sweetheart. He died because there was an accident. I had been punishing myself for something that was never my fault." A soft breath. My father handled grief by working harder. I learned that from him. But there was another way to live. I just had to be brave enough to try it. The words broke something open inside me. I wept then, really wept for the first time in 10 years. I cried for my brother, for the years I had spent running from pain that found its way in anyway, for the woman I might have been if I had let myself feel instead of control. When the tears finally stopped, I felt emptied out, raw, but also strangely lighter. I knew what I had to do. The emergency board meeting convened. 12 faces stared at me from around the polished conference table, their expressions ranging from concern to openly hostile. The chairman, a silver-haired man named Thomas Wells, spoke first. "Megan, I think we all understand the gravity of this situation. The company's reputation is at stake. We need decisive action to restore confidence." "I agree," I said calmly, "which is why I am here to present the results of our internal investigation." I pressed a button on my laptop and the conference room screen filled with data, email records, IP addresses, authorization logs. The anonymous leak did not come from outside the company. It was sent from a device registered to Jason Morrison, our operations director. I clicked to the next slide. In his rush to damage Mr. Bennett, Mr. Morrison grew careless. He used his company laptop to send the email, apparently confident that no one would think to investigate him. It traced the source within hours of being asked. The room went silent. Jason Morrison, seated at the far end of the table, had gone pale. Mr. Morrison also appeared in authorization logs for the routing software update that caused our $2 million shipping crisis. The same crisis that Mr. Bennett resolved, while Mr. Morrison was recommending disciplinary action against innocent employees. "This is absurd," Jason stammered. "The evidence is conclusive." My voice was ice. "Mr. Morrison's employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort him from the building." 2 guards appeared at the conference room door. Jason looked around the table for support and found none. He stood slowly, his face a mask of barely contained rage, and walked out without another word. I turned back to the board. "Now, regarding Curtis Bennett, I know many of you expect me to announce his termination as well to distance the company from the scandal, protect our stock price, move on. I straightened my shoulders. I am not going to do that. Thomas Wells leaned forward. Megan, be reasonable. Curtis Bennett was hired through an unconventional process, but his performance had been exceptional. He resolved a crisis that our senior leadership created. He improved team cohesion in a division that had been dysfunctional for years. He did all of this while facing discrimination, sabotage, and personal attacks that would have broken most people. I met each board member's gaze in turn. If we fired him now, we were not protecting the company. We were proving that Horizon Group punishes people for being good at their jobs. The room buzzed with murmured objections. I raised my hand for silence. Mr. Bennett would continue his trial period. His evaluation would be conducted by an independent committee, not by me. If he did not meet performance standards, he would be terminated like any other employee. But he deserved a fair assessment, not a public execution to satisfy the news cycle. The vote was contentious, but in the end, the board approved my proposal by a narrow margin. I walked out of the conference room feeling lighter than I had in years. I found Curtis that evening at a small park near his apartment in the Bridgeport neighborhood. He was sitting on a bench, watching the sun set behind a row of buildings, his expression unreadable. I sat down beside him without asking permission. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I pulled his resignation letter from my coat pocket and held it out to him. I am not accepting this. Curtis looked at the letter but did not take it. The board had agreed to let him complete his trial. Independent evaluation, no special treatment, no protection. I kept my voice steady, but the decision to stay was his. I would not force him. Curtis stared at the letter for a long time. I could see him weighing the risks, calculating the costs to himself and his daughter. Why? He asked finally. You could have let me go. It would have been easier for everyone. I thought about Ryan's photograph, about my mother's voice on the phone, about all the years I had spent building walls that kept out everything except loneliness. Because you reminded me of something I forgot, that control is not the same as connection, and connection is what actually matters. Curtis held my gaze for a long moment. Then he took the resignation letter from my hand and tore it in half. Zoe asked me this morning if I was scared, he said quietly. I told her yes. She said, Daddy, you always tell me that brave people are scared, but they do it anyway. She is 6 years old and she understands something I keep forgetting. I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Smart kid, she gets it from her mother. We sat together on the bench as the last light faded from the sky. No promises were made, no declarations offered, just two people sitting in comfortable silence, watching the world turn. After some time had passed, Horizon Group announced a new initiative called the Second Chance Program, a hiring pathway for qualified candidates whose circumstances did not fit traditional corporate requirements. The company also launched a support network for employees who were single parents, including flexible scheduling and emergency childcare assistance. Curtis completed his trial period with exemplary evaluations. He was not offered the COO position. His experience did not qualify him for executive leadership, and I refused to promote him beyond his capabilities just to make a point. Instead, he was appointed regional operations lead for the Northeast Division, a role that matched his skills and gave him room to grow. He earned it. Everyone who worked with him knew that. On a Saturday evening in early spring, I knocked on the door of a small apartment in the Bridgeport neighborhood. Curtis answered, wearing jeans and a faded college sweatshirt, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen him. Zoe has been asking about you, he said, stepping aside to let me in. The apartment was modest but warm, mismatched furniture, crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, the smell of something delicious cooking on the stove. Zoe ran up to me with a sheet of paper clutched in her hands. I made you something. I knelt down to accept the gift. It was a drawing of three figures standing together: a tall man, a small girl with butterfly clips, and a woman with long dark hair. That's you, Zoe explained, pointing to the woman. I drew you because you smile a lot when you're with Daddy. I felt my throat tighten. I looked up at Curtis, who was watching us with an expression I could not quite name. Thank you, Zoe, I managed. It is beautiful. Later, after dinner, after Zoe had been put to bed with a story about a princess who built her own castle, Curtis and I stood together by the kitchen window. I do not know where this is going, I said softly. Curtis nodded. Neither do I. Does that scare you? He considered the question carefully. For a long time, not knowing felt like the most dangerous thing in the world. He needed certainty. He needed control. He needed to protect Zoe from anything that might hurt her. He turned to face me. But lately, he had started to think that not knowing might be okay as long as you were not facing it alone. I reached out and took his hand. It was a small gesture. Nothing dramatic, nothing final. Just two people choosing to stand together in uncertainty. Through the window, the city glittered like a constellation of small hopes. Somewhere in the apartment behind us, a 6-year-old girl slept peacefully, dreaming of princesses and heroes and a future that had not been written yet. We were not living happily ever after. That was a fairy tale, and real life did not work that way. But for the first time in longer than either of us could remember, we were not alone. And that was enough. I never imagined that a simple glitch in our scheduling system would shatter the walls I had built around my heart for so long. When Curtis Bennett, that dedicated single dad with nothing but honesty and quiet strength, sat across from me in that Chicago boardroom, he didn't just interview for a job. He walked straight into my carefully controlled world and changed it forever. For years, I believed success came from perfect systems, ruthless efficiency, and never letting emotion get in the way. I thought control could protect me from the pain of losing my brother. But Curtis showed me the beautiful truth I had been missing. He taught me that real leadership, real power, isn't found in titles or bottom lines. It lives in the way we listen to each other, in showing up for people even when it's inconvenient, and in giving someone a chance even when the world says they don't belong. Watching him fight for his little girl Zoe while facing whispers, rumors, and unfair judgment reminded me that the most valuable things in life, connection, compassion, and courage, can't be measured on a spreadsheet. The greatest lesson I learned is this: sometimes the wrong door leads you to the exact place you were meant to be. When we choose kindness and authenticity over perfection, we don't just build better companies, we build better lives. If this story touched your heart like it touched mine, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's one unexpected person or moment that changed your perspective on life? And if you want more emotional, life-changing stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Your support keeps these meaningful stories coming. Thank you for being here with me on this journey.